When I was about 16 in 2010, my family moved from Fairbanks, Alaska to Williamsburg, Virginia. We wound up in this strange neighborhood. I won't disclose this particular neighborhood or the coordinates of the exact place in question, though I can find them very easily with Google Maps. It's probably still there. This neighborhood gave me this really cursed vibe, like Children of the Corn, and the house we were staying in seemed doubly eerie. We had just moved in, and as I was always the adventurer and the goth kid, I liked to explore the woods surrounding the neighborhood. Back then, I was raised with having to entertain myself outside, and this translated even to my current adulthood years. I really enjoy getting intentionally lost. The incident felt so strange and uncomfortable, and still makes me feel that way to this day. I went into the woods at the end of my streets, and around 20 minutes in, I discovered a swamp. Steam or smoke rose out of it, and dead animal bones all around it. Instantly, I had thought the swamp to be toxic, but I was relieved to see that there were two swans on the water, dunking their heads in, as swans do. I scoped it out and decided to go back another day. Second time I went, I decided a deer skull around the water's edge would look really cool in my room. So I put one from the edge of the swamp in my bag and headed home. Something about that swamp just made me feel like I was being drained. I felt like nihilistic depression, but as a local. It was unsurprisingly after these events that I also began to suffer from the depression that eventually led to my alcoholism. As I headed out of the woods for home, everyone in the neighborhood on the way to my house was out on their front porch or lawn, just staring at me like ventriloquist dummies. They followed me with their gaze as I walked home. I felt like I shouldn't have taken the skull. As a polytheist later in life, I learned to trust this feeling. I dismissed it as childhood fear and superstition and placed this skull on my dresser in my room. The next morning, I woke up with sores all over my face. I had somehow come into contact with poison ivy on my face, which was a surprisingly common occurrence for a young teenage adventurer in Virginia. I just felt like it was a bad idea to have taken the skull, but I figured it was just my own fascination with the uncomfortable feelings of confronting mortality that made me fear it. The same fascination, however, caused me to cling to it. And so it remained on my dresser, and sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, feeling something was caressing my face. I'd hear a voice wake me from a dead sleep. After a week, I could no longer sleep. That's when the neighbours started showing up, wanting to welcome my family to the neighbourhood. They brought cookies and called one family at a time, once a day, for a week. They seemed very conservative and polite, but so was my family, and so was I. Every family that visited me asked me the same thing. My parents made it a point to tell them that my now scarred up and oozing face was not acne, but poison ivy from the woods. The visitors asked me, "Oh, did you go to the swamp?" And I replied, "Yeah, the one at the end of the street." And they'd say, "Did you see the swans?" At first I thought it was awesome that someone else knew about what I thought was my secret discovery in the woods. But then I started to realize after the second time that they were saying it with increasing fervor and implication in their voice, something my parents noticed. They asked me if I really did see any swans in the woods, and I told them I had. They thought it was weird and shrugged. I was heavily unnerved at this point and slightly hallucinating due to the insomnia I was experiencing. The feeling of something standing by me or over me became very real and very scary in my room, even while awake and even during the day. It occurred to me to try something a 16-year-old Christian kid wouldn't usually do. I had a seance, in part because I was very lonely and hoped for a friend from beyond the veil, and in part because I wanted to try to smooth things over with whatever it was. A few Google searches later, and in the dark of my room with only a candle lit, I started to close my eyes and address the entity directly. The room got really cold, and as I spoke to it, the television in my room turned on to display only static. My radio turned on by itself and played static too, and the skull fell off my dresser. I panicked, and the next morning, I didn't sleep much between then and the next morning, I stuffed the skull back into the bag and went out to the swamp. The swans were still there on the swamp. I instantly placed the skull at the edge of the swamp and apologized to whatever entity was angered that I took it. Like a man hypnotized, some strange insanity called me towards the center of the swamp, to a small peninsula in the middle of where a tree grew. I spaced out, and it seemed there was some element of missing time. I tried to walk back from the tree. The grass gave way to mud, and I began to sink. Luckily, giant 6-foot teen boy that I was, I pulled myself out of the mud after quite a bit of a struggle. It extended halfway up to my waist, and I walked home. The neighbours stared at me like they did when I took the skull as I walked home, muddled from the belly on down. I went into the house, and my parents asked what happened. I told them I had stepped in deep mud in the swamp and sunk. The creepy stuff slowed, but the next week, the landlord exploded with anger at my family because he did not want to make repairs to the house and told us to leave. He didn't evict us, of course, because he couldn't legally do so, but he said that he would not be making any repairs and that he preferred that we leave. So we let my family out of the lease and we moved from there. I was friends with a girl in the neighbourhood who was incidentally the first person to ask about the swans. We kept in touch until the day I moved out, and then she shut down her Facebook and I never heard from her again. In March of 2020, I planned to go back. I wanted to see if there were swans still there, but with more fleshed out knowledge of the occult and my own belief in the goddess Bridget. I have wondered for a long time if the dead animals were offerings to the swamp, as ancient Celts used to do. A pagan friend of mine in Pennsylvania liked to sink the bones of deer caught in a swamp behind the house. My own family and belief is that there may be something akin to a god or spirit there, and I'd like to make friends with whatever it is. However, I never got the chance. The day before I headed to the swamp, Virgin enforced a mandatory quarantine, and so I headed back home and merely managed to make it after another 6 flight changes. A few days later, the airlines cancelled all flights. I'm not sure if I want to go back. I lived with my parents and my younger brother in a single family home in the southwest of Germany. It was an old house. We moved in when I was 7, and as far as I can remember, everything was fine the first 3 years. When I was 10, my brother and I were on the second floor, and my parents' room was in the basement. Above us, there was just the attic. Around this time, my brother and I started to hear some cracking up from there. Only at night, maybe once a week. The sounds changed over time and got more frequent. It sounded like steps at this point, like someone was walking up and down. We both clearly heard the source of the sound was not static and kind of moving. We heard it maybe every second night at this point, sometimes every day for multiple weeks. Nothing too weird at this point. Many children confused normal sounds with creepy stuff at night. The door to the stairs up there was right next to my door. Basically, it was just a small room containing only the stairs. You could be damn sure. I was always checking twice that the door was locked when I came home from school and before going to bed. When I was 12, my parents went to the birthday of a friend. It wasn't uncommon to let me and my brother alone at such events, as we were really calm and we didn't do weird shit alone. Except for staying up too long. At this time, my brother and I had separate rooms. My brother moved into the third and last room on his floor. I was laying in bed and heard an audiobook on CD. It was about 1 a.m, lights out. The CD stopped, and when I wanted to start the next one, so I stood up and went to the stereo. For some reason, I thought at this exact moment about whether I had checked the lock of the door to the small room when I heard something from the hallway. The doorknob was pressed down really hard, and the door to this tiny room scratched slowly over the door. I say scratched because it was hard to open and close the door. If you would leave it half open in the morning, it would have been half open in the evening. No way it would close by itself, let alone again. I was scared and completely frozen and just stood there. I had the feeling every second that someone or something would come into my room. Felt like hours, but probably was just half an hour. Then I heard the door scratching over the floor again, and the door lock clicking. After another 5 minutes or so, I took all my courage, ran to the door and locked it. Finally, my parents came home and I was able to sleep like 2 hours later. They said I can tell them tomorrow. It must have been a bad dream. Next day, it wasn't necessary to ask my brother whether he had heard the same thing. He seemed really frightened. This was no joke to him. We told our parents. Needless to say, they didn't believe us. We complained earlier about the attic, but never as serious as this time. Got really paranoid after this. Checked the door like 5 times a day. When my mother came up to go there, I was waiting for her to come up back to the door immediately. One evening about a month later, I walked past this damn door when again the doorknob was pressed from the other side. Something heavy pressed against the door from the other side. It moved like half a centimetre in my direction, but thank God it was locked. I cried. The doorknob was pressed a second time before I ran to my parents' room downstairs. They didn't take it seriously, but my dad agreed to go upstairs. There was nothing that could have moved into the door. No burglaries, no homeless guy or whatever. I still think about that, what I could have seen if the door would have not been locked. About this time, I started to hear a breathing sound. It wasn't like breathing, it was breathing. Breathing in and out, like breathing deep through the nose. I heard it every time I turned off the lights in my room. Only in my room. Only when I was alone. It would stop when the lights were turned on, but started surely when turning them off again. It came from a dark corner of the room, but not the same corner every time. It was also very scary. Not sure whether it was something to do with the other stuff. I slept with a small light until I moved out when I was 22. Really? Like a child, like. Today I'm 28, work as a research assistant and pursue a PhD. People around me would describe me as pretty rational. I shared the apartment for 6 years with my best friend. She moved out 2 weeks ago, and I'm living alone for the first time. The reason I started to think about this topic again and wanted to write it down, and this is by no means some creepy bullshit plot twist at the end, I started to hear the breathing again. Coming from the now empty room, I can hear it when I go to the toilet next to this room. And once I heard it from the hallway, I'm very scared and sleep at my girlfriend's apartment as often as I can. My uncle's house was constructed from zero, but the place where it had been abandoned for a long time before he started building. I have so many stories from there that, to me, prove that it's indeed haunted. But I'll begin with the oldest one I can remember, before there even was a house there. Right next to the house, there's a kindergarten. I studied there when I was a kid, just like my mom and her brothers before me. There was always a playground legend about a man in military uniform who called the kids to go behind the school and then they disappeared. Even as a kid, I remember being so afraid of going to that particular place behind the school, but as I grew, I stopped thinking about it. Fast forward a few years, and my uncle's house had just been finished. One night when I was out doing laundry with my cousin, I decided I wanted to see the kindergarten from above, as it had been years since I saw it on the inside. So we got into the balcony and got a really good view of the place. And after a few seconds, I noticed someone walking in between the classroom and the back of the school. I couldn't see their face, but my whole body tensed as I saw the shadow go through the wall and then disappeared behind the school. I remembered the story from my childhood and still wonder if that was the same man as the kids saw back then. Most of the paranormal experiences I've had have been with said cousin I mentioned earlier. So I do believe her when it comes to paranormal things. She's told me that happened in my uncle's house. One of the scariest ones for her was a time when she had just come home from school and wanted to ask her aunt, let's call her Sarah, if they were going to eat at her grandparents' house or if they will be staying there. So she goes to the bottom of the stairs and yells, "Aunt Sarah, are you here?" To which Sarah's voice responds, "Yes." Then again my cousin yelled, "Are we going to go to Grandma's?" But no one answered after that. After a few minutes without a response, my cousin went to the second floor and started looking for Sarah, but there was absolutely no one there, not a single person. She then called her on the phone only to find out that they had all gone to her grandparents' house and were waiting for her to go as well. She ran out of there and didn't come back for weeks as she was too afraid the voice she heard. I wasn't present when this happened, but it's important to the next story, where I was present. After those and a bunch of other paranormal things happened to her and our family, they decided they would call a priest to bless the house, and invited everyone to pray and later hang out with them. My whole family was there, 20 plus people in the backyard as the priest blessed the house. We were all praying and singing, happy, united, when suddenly, just as the priest was going to climb the stairs to the second floor, a loud voice sounded, as if it was coming from where we were standing, and it said, "Go away." My 14-year-old self was shaking with fear, but the lady that was directing the prayer yelled at us to pray louder, to take each other's hands. A lot of people were crying, with horror at what we had just witnessed. That has to be one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. And for that, I'm convinced that there is something hiding in my uncle's house. Something horrible. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I went with my parents to a big hardware/gardening store. Those living in Europe probably know which one I'm talking about. And since they had to spend some time choosing tiles and other things, they put me in this ball pit with slides and jumping beds that was full of kids. I remember seeing kids getting into the side holes and then appearing in the ball pit. I wanted to do the same, so I just chose one slide. That slide didn't take me to the ball pit. Instead, I ended up in an empty cube made of plastic that was big enough for me to stand up. I remember I could see the people on the street through the thick plastic wall, but it was still all blurred. I also remember thinking that maybe that part of the playground was still under construction, but why would that slide be open then? Also, how could I be the only kid there? Surely another kid could have used the same slide, but there I was alone. I waited for their 10-15 minutes before trying to climb up the slide. I don't remember how, but in the end I came out of the cube and waited until my parents were done shopping. They picked me up and we went home. I'm 29 now, and I never mentioned any of this to them. Last night, I heard something while half asleep. It must have been around 3 or 4 a.m, maybe later, and everything was very quiet. It was a very faint sound, like the sound when someone is quietly walking and slightly brushing against their own leg, or the sound of someone sliding a piece of paper on a table. As I became aware of it, that's what triggered it. I felt my heart rate rise, my ears popping, like they were expanding. as if they pointed to the sound source, and I perceived my surroundings becoming louder and louder. It literally felt as if I was turning up the volume in my head, until it became unbearably loud. Perhaps I heard my neighbour next door. It may also have been someone walking outside. I don't remember, and or couldn't tell because it was such a surreal experience. I don't know if I was becoming more frightened because these quiet sounds were so loud. It felt like someone was in the room, or because the turning up the volume thing was so intense and surreal. The weirdest thing was that as the volume actually got to the point where it was absolutely unbearably loud, I heard something I could only compare to what you might hear when a computer has a graphics or audio error or glitch. I heard that in my head, like actually digital type of noise, as if my audio driver was overloaded and had to reboot. I don't know how to describe the sounds, but I'm sure I could recreate it quite easily on a computer. A stuttering, crunching, distorted, algorithmic type of sound. After that, I remember just kind of like, what the fuck just happened? And the volume was immediately much quieter after that, and I just fell back to sleep. It started at the beginning of December, when my mom was walking past her room and suddenly jumped. She claimed she saw a dark-haired little girl sitting on her bed and told her she didn't look right, that her face was all dark, like she was wearing a black mask. Since then, we've been getting a lot of activity, seeing things in the corner of our eyes, our Xbox turning on by itself, things disappearing and then reappearing, things moving on their own. And recently, we've started hearing voices, but not like little girls or anything like that. We've been hearing family members' voices. Last night, my mom claimed she heard my brother screaming for help, when really he was sleeping in his room. And while I was doing dishes, I thought I heard my mom calling me from the living room, when she was actually in her room sleeping. And I thought I saw something standing in the corner of my brother's room. It was tall and completely dark, like some kind of shadow monster, and I felt watched the whole time afterwards. So, I really need to know, is this entity dangerous? It hasn't done anything bad, but it is starting to scare us. I've never encountered something like this before, and I'm curious. I've been living in the same house with my father for most of my life. When I was young, I had scary things I saw in my bedroom at night, mainly a cloaked man who resembled death, who would float out of the wall on one side of my room and go through the opposite side. It would be a nightly occurrence, to the point where I knew it would happen and I would hide under my covers, sweating while knowing what was happening around me. It used to be a joke that I slept in a cocoon. I wouldn't just experience things like this at my house, it would be at others as well. Once I was around 8 or 9 and had a sleepover at my cousin's place. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, covers wrapped over my head so just my eyes and nose were visible. I noticed a pair of legs standing in front of my face. I felt immediate terror and couldn't bear to look up. I just pretended to be asleep and never spoke of it again. At my grandparents' house I'd sleep over, again about 9 years old, and would constantly have experiences of hearing footsteps coming to my door and then continuing down past my room. My door would be open so I could see no one was there. I woke up one time and was face to face with a dog, but quickly wrapped the sheets back over my face and prayed it would go away. Anyways, all these experiences and more I had put off being young, tired, or just made up in my head because ghosts aren't real. Until last night, which confirms all my experiences. Well, the other night, I was sitting in my room reading with my dog on my bed, as I usually do. It was about 12:30 a.m. I then had heard a light thud at my door, and when I had looked up, my shower towel that hangs on the back of my door started swaying lightly. It then stopped for a second or two and began swaying a bit more aggressively. At this point, fear and terror took over and I yelled out, "Spirit, you are not welcome here." At that point, I had said that the towel was thrown off the hooks on the back of my door, scaring both me and my dog. Since this has happened, it's validated that spirits are real, and I've been trying to find answers, but I don't really know where to look. Everyone I've spoken to doesn't seem to believe me or have some other far-fetched explanation. The whole thing sounds like a joke and stupid, but I have no explanation as to why or how this happened. I should also add that there is no vent near my towel. Windows are closed as it's winter, and very cold. My door was closed so nothing external from the room could have affected it. I just feel alone and terrified every night. Just needed somewhere to vent and maybe connect to others whose experiences might be similar. One day in the fall of 2005, I came home after school to watch some TV and unwind from another day in the shit show that was my freshman year of high school. I sat on the couch and turned on the TV, and a strange image was displayed on it. Instead of our usual dish cable, there was an image of a room with white walls. The image seemed to be from what I think to be my own point of view. I could see 3 pairs of feet sticking out of the sheets at the end of the bed, with an antique wrought iron footboard. The exact same kind of footboard on my parents' bed. The feet were that of a woman, a man, and a kid, and looked eerily similar to my own feet and that of my mother and stepfather. Also in this room was a tall blonde man in a tan suit, standing about 10 feet away from the bed, with his hands in his pockets, and he was looking away from us at this very large, disembodied face that was looking right at the screen. The weirdest thing is that the face was that of the tall blonde man. At first, I thought there was just something wrong with the TV or with the cable system, so I did some light troubleshooting. Just the simple stuff like turning the TV and cable box off and back on again. Nothing changed, not a problem. I thought I'd just unplug everything and that would reset things, and I'd be back to flipping through the channels. I was wrong. I even tried unplugging the cable box while the TV was plugged in, and tried changing inputs to any of our 4 different inputs, and nothing changed. This haunting image with eyes that followed my every move wouldn't go away. Every time we turned on our TV, that was all we would see. This went on for 4 days. We called the dish, and by the time the technician came by, our TV had reverted back to normal function, and he said as far as he could tell, there was never anything wrong with our cable box. We still don't know why the image was on our TV, or why we couldn't remove it on our own. But every now and then, when I close my eyes, I see the image I saw on the TV those days, and the piercing eyes of the blonde man, and it sends chills down my spine. Last night was a really hot summer night, and my window was wide open while I was at my PC. I heard a noise and realised there was a huge bug flying around my lamp, and I freaked out. I'm generally scared of bugs. I ran to get the bug spray and sprayed all over the lamp until it died, but far from away, almost outside of my room. Bug dead. I'm hyperventilating and decide to stay at the window to catch my breath. And that's when I saw the most horrifying scene of my life. I live on the 5th floor and was checking the building in front of mine. This window caught my attention because I saw some movement, and in a span of seconds there was someone climbing it, swinging a leg outside and throwing themselves. I panicked. My body instinctively turned away, and I was waiting to hear the sound of them hitting the ground. But nothing happened. I looked back at the building entrance and couldn't see anything because there was a lot of trees. My whole body was shaking. I'm crying and was unlocking my phone to call the police. but I'm also scared to do so because I don't know if what I saw was real. I didn't call the police and decided to call my boyfriend to tell him what I saw. He tried to calm me down and said that if there was nothing there, it was probably an illusion. I stayed on the call with him and went to bed, but worried I'd listened to sirens at any time. Next day, today, I woke up super early to hit the gym and saw that that window was closed. I was relieved and scared at the same time because I knew what I saw. It wasn't like a blurred figure or anything. It was a legit person. Anyway, I came home from the gym and started to check the building again. That's when I realised all those windows had some kind of bars or safety nets, yet the one I saw last night had nothing. I'm planning to wait till nighttime to see if I can recognise which apartment it was by the lighting and see if there's a net or something. So my questions are, logical thinking. Could I have had a hallucination due to inhaling the bug spray? I'd love to hear that inhaling small quantities of it could cause that. Has anyone ever experienced something like this? Was it a failed reality leap or bug in the matrix? I thought about it and relieved all the images in my head, and I honestly don't think I could have been another scenario. As I mentioned in one of my replies, I saw this person climb the window and hold themselves against it, standing up on the edge with the upper part of the body still inside the room. The window looked similar to mine, so I guess it was about 1.3 meters in height. Standing up, the person swung their right leg outside, like hesitating for a moment, and the next second, almost like an impulse, threw themselves out. Their backs facing the floor. Their bodies fell rapidly, and that's when I turned away. It was like you could feel the intent of it. I tried last night to search for information about it, but not being the building I live in, not knowing anyone that lives there, and the construction itself being probably 20 plus years old, it was very hard to find any information. Also, there's no public library nearby, and going to the police station feels like I'd just get myself in trouble for looking crazy. So that's a no, for now. I think the best thing for me is to make sure I keep living my life the best I can, and take care of those close to me. I thought about the many outcomes, and I guess the best one for me, as for the moment, is to just leave it. I did put some salt in my window though, as I'm now inclining myself to believe it was some sort of hallucination and heavy energy around. I still couldn't bring myself to read the many theories about the residual energy, or the stone tape theory, because I'm too scared.